Daf Mem Zayin. So we were talking yesterday about some of the halachot about partners and basically the limitation that a partnership would make on your ability to enjoy owned property, joint property. Then we, at the end of the Mishnah, said another case, which is why the Ran actually seems to split up the Mishnah differently than our Gemara does. And the next case in the Mishnah was, and I'm reading now from Memvav from the Mishnah, if you're mudar michavero hana, you say you're not going to get any benefit from someone else, and they own a bathhouse or a beit habad, sorry, the opposite, right? You're not going to allow anyone to get hana from you, and they own a bathhouse or something like that. Can you go to the bathhouse? So we discussed that yesterday. That was one case. We discussed that a little bit, and then the last case in the Mishnah was the one we're going to discuss today. Sorry, omer lechavero. I prohibit myself on going into your house or into your field. So then we said, even if the man died and the house went to somebody else, right? You only prohibited that man's house. So you could go into the house now. It's on different, right? But if you specify not the man's house, but the field, I'm never going to go into this house. On the house is the subject, right? Then you can never go into the house, even if that changes ownership or the man dies or whatever, because you prohibited the house. And as the Ram pointed out, I mentioned this yesterday, there is a flip side, which is that if the house falls down and it's rebuilt, you're permitted to go into it now if it's the house, because it's no longer the entity, but not if it's the person. Now, the Gemara has today another question, which you got it? Omer lechavero, says the Gemara on the top line of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, Boi Avimi. Avimi asked the question, he put that here in the Masar Shas that the Rush has a girsa of Boi Abaya, but either way, Avimi in our Gemara asked, what if you say, Konem lebayit zeh shata nichnas? You say to somebody else, right? I will not let you go into my house. I don't want you, my house is prohibited for you. And then the person dies, mate. O machru la'acher, or sells it to somebody else. The question is, can that person take the person, Reuven, who ossered the house, does that osser it forever, for perpetuity, even after he dies, or even after he sells it? O dilma, or not, right? So ma, do you say, Adam osser davar shebershuto, right? That a person is capable of prohibiting something that he owns, even after it leaves his reshut. And obviously you can do that, or you can make your property into hektish, right? Obviously, then it remains hektish forever. There's nothing you can do, make me podeh. But you can make things prohibited. So can a person make a neder on a thing even for when it leaves his reshut or he dies? Oh, lo, or do you say that a neder is limited to, and again, probably unless you say something explicitly, it's limited to when you're alive or when you own it. So Tashma, let's try to bring a proof. Tashma. Let's bring a proof from a Mishnah in Bava Kama. Ha'omer libno. A person says to their child, they're very angry at their son who never came to visit them. Konem shi'ata naneli. I swear that you can get no benefit from me. Everything I own is prohibited to you. And then the man dies, umate. And it turns out that in his will, he left half of his belongings to his son. Or he didn't say anything, right? Which they didn't used to really have wills. So says the Mishnah there, or the Braita there, Yerushenu. The son gets his Yerusha because the father prohibited him from getting any Hana'ah when he was alive. Once he dies, that no longer is applicable. However, if the father said, B'chayav u'b'moto umeit lo Yerushenu. The father said, I'm so angry with you. I don't want you to get anything from me now or when I die. The father can do that. He has the power to prohibit his son from getting Hana'ah from his property, even after he leaves his reshut, because he's dead, right?
He would have to have witnesses, right?
In terms of what, making a kinyan?
Yeah. In terms of making sure that he has said that he cannot benefit from him even after he dies.
100%. No. The question of how you prove it, yeah. So you have to either write it down or 100%. I think the issue here is that, remember, there's a whole separate issue, right? So the other issue, which we'll talk about in Bava Batra much more, is what if a father just writes in his will, I don't want my middle child to get any money, right? So that's a different question. Whether you can do that, and whether you can do it with a kinyan, which I thought you meant, whether you can do that kind of thing is a lot of discussion, because the default in the Torah is that, it goes split between the children. and the Bechar gets double, etc.
Right. Right.
But here it's a little different because here you made a neder, right? So what you basically, it's not just that you said, I don't want you to get my Yerusha. The father said, I don't want you to ever, you can never get benefit from me.
Mhm.
It's a pretty strong thing to say.
Right.
And the question is, does it extend beyond his life? It is a very interesting thing. There's actually a whole machloket here, since you raised it, about what happens to the property, right? I think the Ran makes the assumption that the son will inherit the property but can never benefit from it, right?
Wow.
Which is
That's weird.
Which is a little weird. The Rashba, I think, is what he quotes, who makes a point and says there's no inheritance if you can't use it. Inheritance is essentially conditional on you getting it. But if is the mechanism there that you can't get it, then you abrogate the whole inheritance. It's very interesting.
So for instance, if this is the only son.
Well, no, but I think that the implication would be, I think the son would get it, and then when the son died, their children would get it, right? So I think that probably would stay in the Yerusha. But yeah, obviously you can't get any benefit, but I guess that's not considered benefit. But
there's no concept of like if he can't benefit from it, then it becomes public.
No. Not really public. I mean, I don't think anyone thinks public. I think the Rashba's argument is that it's not Yerusha. So that son doesn't exist. So if there's another son, they get it all. If there's no sons, remember we have a whole Yerusha goes to the father, it goes to the brother, it goes to the uncle.
Okay.
It's the only person is the ger, right? We talk about Yerusha ger, who doesn't have family in Jewish family, right? So that goes ultimately, if there's really no one, it goes to the Beit HaKabayit, right? And that's goes to Hekdesh. Okay. Tanan. Now let's continue the Gemara. We have a very interesting Mishnah, Tanan Hatam. We learned over there, meaning later in the Masechet, that if a person says, Konem pirot ha'elu alai, right? If a person says, these fruits from this apple tree are konem to me. They're, again, we always say konem is a lashon of karban, right? They're like a karban to me. Or konem hein alpi, or konem hein lipi. These are all languages of these fruits should be prohibited to my mouth. Then, says the Mishnah, fascinating halacha, not only can you not eat the fruit, but if you exchange the fruit for other food, you're prohibited on that thing, which is not such a big chiddush, the Ran says. I mean, that's true. Like if you have chametz that's asur b'hana'ah and you exchange the chametz, you can't just eat the chametz, right? Presumably. You can't eat the other thing necessarily. But more importantly, you're also asur b'chilu fehem if you exchange them for something, u'bigiduleihem. And if they grow something, right? If you plant this apple seed and it grows an apple tree, because you are prohibited in the mother apple, you're prohibited in everything that comes from that apple, right? Which is quite a chiddush. The Ran discusses this at some length here, why this would be the case. And some of it, it's not so simple, but obviously. But he points out that probably a lot of it is there's two problems here. One is, can you make the thing? Right. And that for sure you can't do, meaning you can't take something that's prohibited to you and say, well, I'm going to go to the store and trade it, but I can't spend this money. So let me trade it for other money that I can spend. Obviously, it defeats the whole purpose. The question is, if you did do that or if someone else did it unknowingly, what happens after the fact? Right. Do you say that if someone took $20, that's asur b'hana, or $20 worth of peirot, and exchanged them for $20 of cucumbers, are the cucumbers also asur b'hana? Does the kedusha, so to speak, go that way? And again, the Ran also points out that probably everyone knows that it doesn't, and that midoraita, there's very few things that actually carry their kedusha with them, or kedusha meaning isur. One that's very famous is avodah zarah, right? So we say by avodah zarah that anything you switch it for becomes like the avodah zarah. You have to burn, throw it in the Yam HaMelech, is always what we say, right? Or destroy it. But you can't, there's no way out of it. But here, the question is it drabanan, right? Did they make a knas on you? Or the other issues with the neder is that you can, of course, with the neder, you can say whatever you want. I mean, there's no limit as long as it's yours, right? So the question is, what did you mean when you make the neder? What did you mean? I want to prohibit the apples and the exchange of the apples and the exchange of the exchange, etc. So that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you're asur b'chilufei megidulei. Now, Boi Rami Bar Chama, the reason we introduced that is to ask the following question. Rami Bar Chama asked, what if you say, not I won't eat these apples, but I don't want Ruvain to eat my apples? Is Ruvain then prohibited in eating what the apples are exchanged for? Right? So I could do it to myself, but can I do it to someone else? Why is it different? So if you say, Konim perot elu al ploni, that person cannot eat my fruit. Mahu b'chilufeihem. Can that person eat something that is exchanged for the fruit? Mi amrina, do you say, well, gabi delay, when you're talking about an individual ostering himself, hov adam oser perot chavero alatzmo, and I can say I'm never going to eat any apples that grew in the state of Washington. That would be foolish, but meaning I can osir apples I don't own, so I can osir apples and their future exchanges. Meaning I don't have to have any ownership over it. So therefore, Adam oser davar shelo bala olam alatzmo, which is the future value of the apples. But gavi chavero, but when you start talking about someone else, I'm limited in what I can do to someone else. I can only limit a person in my things that I own. So I can limit a person in my apples. But then if you take my apples and sell them for peaches that I don't own, right? How can I have control over those peaches? How can my neder change the status of what happens to those things, right? So if you're talking about now someone else, right? Where am I? Gabi chavero, 2 lines in the bottom. Ho ve'ein adam oser perot chavero. I can't go up to someone and say, you can never eat apples from the state of Washington, right? I don't have, unless I own the whole state, right? But you can't say that. So therefore, maybe ein adam oser davar shelo ba le'olam al chavero. You can't basically extend your power of neder on something that's theoretical. So it's a little bit of an extension, right? Because in one case we're talking about something that's lo ba le'olam, right? Or main, which is the giduleim more than anything, the thing that will grow from them. But the question is, how far does the language of my neder and my intent extend when you prohibit things? So certainly, again, as an individual, I can prohibit anything on myself, right? Including things that don't belong to me. I can say I'm never going on the subway, right? I don't own anything. And so therefore, it's plausible that the Mishnah says, and the Mishnah clearly says, that I can prohibit fruit and anything that comes from those fruit will be asur. But if I do it for someone else, am I limited to what's in front of me, or can I also extend it beyond to the giduleim and the chilufeim, right? O dilma, or do you say mishum de chilufin ki gidulan dami lo shnahu v'lo shna chavero, that because we're thinking of the chilufin as the gidulim, that basically what you trade it for, although again you traded your apples for peaches, or it could be a steak. I mean, it doesn't have to be a fruit, obviously, but you trade your apples for another food that's similar to what grew from the apple, which is prohibited, right? So we all understand that if you take the apple seeds and put them in the ground, now it's not so clear why we all understand that, but we're taking that for granted, that if I say you can't benefit from my apples, if my apples are planted and they make apple trees, you can't benefit from those trees. So our big question is, what if you exchange those apples for something else? So that's the question. Amar Rav Acha bar Minyumi, the top second line on Daf Mem Zayin on Bet. Tashma, let's try to bring a proof from a case having to do, which we've had many cases, with situations where a man owes a woman, his wife, support, and he doesn't give it, right? So what's the case? Ha'omer le'ishto. A man says to his wife, he's very, very angry at his wife, and he says, Konem sha'ani ne'anelech. I am not giving you a penny. Everything that I own is prohibited to you. So it's very likely that he either has to divorce her or go ask a she'ilah on his neder, right? And get permission to get out of it. But for the moment, he said it, and it doesn't automatically batel. It's not batel. He owes her money. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. A neder can be motzi midei shibud, right? You can owe someone something. You can't take away ownership, but you can take away a responsibility. Again, you can go to court, and the court would obviously make you pay or absolve your neder or divorce or whatever. But a neder is more powerful than your responsibility. So the husband is responsible to provide sustenance, but he made a neder that he's not going to give her any hana from his stuff. So what does the bride to say she should do? Loveh, she should go to the bank and say, I need to borrow $1,000 to pay my grocery bill. And then balei chovin ba'in v'nifraim. The bank will go to the husband and collect from the husband, because the husband has a responsibility to give his wife food. She borrowed money and he owes basically that responsibility. So basically, she can't get money from her husband because he asked her to b'hana'ah, but she can borrow money from a third party, and the third party can go to the husband and have the husband pay. So now, this seems a little bit like a trick, right? It seems that that even though, this is unclear exactly how you understand this, but we'll try, that even though essentially this is chilufin. This is the one way the Ran understands it. That basically the payment that the woman is getting from the loan is a replacement for her husband's money. So essentially you exchange the husband's money because now he becomes responsible to pay back the loan. So essentially she's getting chilufin of what's prohibited to her. Her husband's money is prohibited to her. By taking money from a bank that is going to then go to her husband and collect, it's essentially a replacement of the value of her husband. That's one way the Ran understands it. The other way the Ran understands it is that maybe the issue is with the person going to collect from the husband, the Baal Chov. That maybe the Baal Chov can't go and collect because they are essentially taking over the Isser of the wife by going and doing it. But I think the Ran likes with the wife's part. So the question is here, how could she do this, right? My taima, why don't you say, my taima Balei Chov Nifraim, which just sounds more like the second shot. Why is it that the people who lend money to this wife can go and collect from the husband? It must be because even though he prohibited her from getting his money, getting borrowed money from his money is not a problem. Lav mishum dechilufin lav kigidulin dami. What's exchanged for money of Isser is not considered to be Usser, like something you grew out of the ground. Amar Rava, says Rava, well, that's not really a very good proof, because Dilma, it's lechatchila hu delo, the avid. Maybe it's only saying, now it can't literally mean lechatchila, because we just encourage this woman to go do that, right? We said she's starving, she needs food, go borrow money. We're not saying do it after the fact. But what we mean is that one understanding is lechatchila, meaning that essentially if you go and exchange money for something directly, that's where you can't do it. But if it's indirect, that's what we mean by of it. It's indirect here because remember, she didn't go and say, I'm going to bring a letter for my husband, he's going to pay, or I'm taking something from my husband, lend me money against it. She went to borrow money. Everyone only lent her money because they knew they were going to go to the husband and collect. Otherwise, they'd just be throwing away their money. But because it was basically done indirectly, not from the husband first, but from her first, that's considered b'diavad, and that's where you're allowed to do it in that way. But still, the question would be, can you do it lechatchila, meaning can you openly go and exchange what your husband, or in any case, what's asur b'hana'ah for something that's not asur b'hana'ah? So that's still our question. So we tried to bring one more proof, tashma, from a totally unrelated case, which is why the Rani gets very excited about all this, because this is a totally unrelated case having to do not with neder, but with a whole other isur b'hana'ah, which I think Charlie's dear to his heart, which is arla, right? So tashma mekadesh be'arla, right? Arla is one of the prohibitions of food. You're not allowed to get hana'ah from things that are arla. Arla is asur b'hana'ah, right? Like chametz, like shavias in certain cases, right? So basically, this grew from the plant for the first 3 years. A man takes a beautiful apple that's arla, let's say apple could be arla, but whatever, a fruit that's arla, and gives it to a woman and says, I want to marry you with this apple. So is she married? No, because the apple's worthless. It's asur b'hana'ah, right? It's like giving chametz, which we talk about as well, right? Chametz of a Pesach. So hamikadesh be'arla eino mikudeshet. But let's say you break the rules. You take your bushel of apples that are arla, you go to the store, you sell them for $10, and you go and give that $10 to a woman to marry her. So if you're machran, you sell the apples, which obviously you can't do. You can't. You're not supposed to do. The kidesh b'di mehem, and then you marry the woman with the value that you got. Then harezu mikudeshet. Then she is married. So again, this seems to imply that even though the arla is asur b'hana'ah, and everybody agrees, you're not allowed to sell arla, right? But if you do, or if you did it by mistake, but even if you did it on purpose, the value of the money that you got for that arla is not arla, right? Because it's chilufeihem, and chilufeihem is not kigiduleim. And that's why you can marry this woman with it. Says in our note, here too, achanami lechatchila hu delo bi'avad avad. Again, this might mean a little different, that what we're saying is not, obviously we told this person not to do it. He went ahead and did it. So that's not the question. The question is, do we tell you not to do it? And so, lichatchila, if something is asur b'hana'ah, are you allowed to go and exchange it for something else that would then remain asur b'hana'ah or not remain asur b'hana'ah? And we actually don't resolve the question. This is the end of our Gemara. and the Ran discusses, he's not really sure how to paskin. The Ran makes a big difference, which is what our Gemara did too, between the person who made the neder and the person who's the subject of the neder. Meaning, if I personally go up and say, I don't want to have any hana from these apples, then I prohibited the apples and the apples' children and the apples' replacement forever, right? But if I go over to someone else and say, you can't get hana from my apples, that's our question. And it's not clear from the end of our Gemara whether the apples are prohibited or the apples and everything that comes after them. The Ran says because it's midrabanan here, he would go the kula, but he's a little upset because the Rambam seems to disagree with him. So the Rambam seems to say that's a safek and therefore you shouldn't eat it. So that's the Ran quotes the Rambam. So that is where our Gemara ends. Since it's not even 8 o'clock, let's do a little bit of the Mishnah.
Actually, but before you go on.
Yeah.
It's a Torah prohibition to benefit from Orla.
Correct. But the question is, you did it, right?
Yeah.
Meaning you gave the apples to someone, he gave you 10 pairs or $20. Is that $20 also, does it retain?
So you try to betroth a woman with it. Is that not a mitzvah haba be'avera?
Yes, it could be a mitzvah ba'avera, but we say it's a different issue, which is that doesn't even have value. But yeah, it's probably both.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
But yes, correct. The question is, and that's why, again, Arla and Neder are probably a little bit different, but we're trying to ask the question to compare them here.
That there's a Steinsaltz note that if the object that you've sold that was Asur B'Hana is Asur B'Hana because of it was used for idol worship, then the money can't do anything.
Correct. So that's why the Ran thinks this is all midrabanan, because the Gemara elsewhere talks about idol worship specifically, plus there's one other exception of being things that are tofes d'meim and doesn't have a list of all these other things, right? So that's why he understands that's midoraita, but the question of neder and arla is all a question of drabanan.
Okay.
I'll read a little bit of the Mishnah, read the whole Mishnah. I don't want to take too much from tomorrow either, but let's read a little bit at least. Says the Mishnah, Hareini alecha cherem. A man says to someone, or a woman says to someone else, I want my everything I own, this is how the Ran understands it, is cherem to you, right? Meaning you can't, which basically means you cannot get any benefit from me. Then hamudar asur, the one who's the subject, who you made the neder to, is prohibited. If I say harei at alai cherem, that everything you own is asur to me, then hanoder asur, and the one who made the neder is asur. If I say hareini alecha va'at alai, I say both, you and me, then shnehem asurim. Then of course they're both prohibited, right? Because I prohibited myself on your stuff and I prohibited you on my stuff, which I have control over. So you can never benefit from you and I can never benefit from, you can never benefit from me and I can never benefit from you. However, this is of course why we're quoting the Mishnah. Ushnehem mutarim b'davar shel olei bavel. They're both permitted to enjoy things that are considered to be, I'm trying to think how the best translate. They belong to world Jewry, might be the way to say it. And our phrase for that is Olei Bavel, because that's, of course, was the extreme of where people lived in their minds, right? And there was a general, there were public works that were set up for those people that were meant to service everybody, not a small community, the entire populace of the Jewish people. For reasons that we're going to discuss in the Gemara, those things remain permitted, because I cannot prohibit you on my thing, including that, because I don't own it. It's owned communally. It's not owned personally. However, even though I just said that, they are in the top line of Memchet, they are asurin b'davar shel oto ha'ir. Things that belong to that city, to that principality or that municipality, they are prohibited. And what's an example, right? Because even though those things are owned jointly, there's a difference between being owned by everybody and therefore by nobody, or being owned by a lot of people, and therefore each person has a small stake in it. And if I have a small stake in it, I can prohibit the thing from you. What are those things? Ezu davar shel olei bavel. What's something that's considered to be owned by all the Jewish people and no one has their personal ownership? Kigon Har HaBayit, like the Beit HaMikdash, or the space of the Beit HaMikdash, the Azarot and the courtyards in the Beit HaMikdash. The Habor Sheb'emtza Derech. They used to have a system of wells, right, for people traveling. So wells are not owned by a person; they're owned by all the travelers, owned by the community. So I can't prohibit you on my well or on the well. What's something that's considered to be, I would say, more local, a municipality, a city, can go in a rechava, the roads, right? If the city pays to pave a road, then it's owned by the city, right? Or square is how often rechava means. Or merchatz, we talked about this yesterday. The city invests in a swimming pool, or Beit HaKnesset, or they invest in a shul, or a teva, right? The things you put the aron in, like the things in the shul. Hasfarim, the books. So anyways, period. Let's stop there for a second. So all of those things are owned by the community, basically, but it's a small community, it's a local community. And therefore, if, and again, they didn't have, I don't know how we would view if you had a city of 10,000 people, but, they probably had communities where there were 20 people or 50 people or 100, right? But that's big for them. So if a communal shul is owned by all the members, and one participant says, everything I have is usher on Shimon can no longer go into that shul. And Reuven can't go in because he prohibited Shimon. Now, if you now, again, this is a non sequitur, but the way the Gemara understands this is that you can get out of this by giving up your rights. Even though you live in the community, you can say, I no longer want rights to my portion in the shul. I'm giving my portion to the community. And the way you would say that would be to the nasi. I'm giving it to the leader, right? And so therefore you could be kotev chalko the nasi. Rabbi Yehuda says, I guess, you know what, I'm going to stop here. So tomorrow we'll do that. It's the middle of the Mishnah, but I'll give you some time to learn tomorrow. That there's also a portion of in kotev chalko the nasi where basically you can get out of your portion so that it's no longer prohibited to the other person. But this is for tomorrow.
You froze. You're on mute, Charlie.
Our Magashir froze.
Yeah, that's what I said. We can't hear him anymore.
Well, we're basically done.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Lila Tov, Miriam. Oh, here he's back.
You were frozen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
no,
froze.
I froze. My internet's not very good, so now I'm on my phone. But I know where exactly I froze, but I was going to stop here at this middle part of the Mishnah because it's really a whole separate discussion.
Okay.
Great.
But the message is that basically, what we have to figure out tomorrow is what, a person can prohibit someone else in something even if they only own a small portion. But there are things that are considered to be communal that you can't say I own any portion. Things like the Beit HaMikdash, right? So, and tomorrow we'll discuss a little bit about how you define those different things.
Okay.
Great.
What did you say about this week? Are you going to be here or not?
Me personally?
Yeah, for Shabbat.
So I'm here I'm here Shabbat, but we'll do Motzei Shabbat.
No, okay, I understand. I thought that you had said you were going to be away, like at some point.
The next Shabbat, but next Sunday Hanukkah, I'll have to do. I can't do the night, so I'll probably have to do.
No, 100%. We have to do it in the morning.
Yeah, but next
we have
Motzei
time for
Shabbat.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
So,
Bye.
Shabbat Tov.
Shabbat tov.